Hi, and welcome to this Comics and Lit walkthrough of AQA Literature Paper 2. This video will give you a quick overview of the paper if you're studying the AQA syllabus. In the next few minutes, I'll give you a brief introduction to the paper and its content. You'll get an overview of the marking criteria so you are aware of how to approach the questions for success, and we'll look back at the specific criteria on the mark scheme for each question on the paper. First, let's take a look at the front of the exam paper. Candidates are also given an answer booklet to record their essay responses in. The exam focuses on modern texts and poetry. This paper is from 2020, but is exactly the same format as the exam you'll sit this year in 2024. Look carefully at the instructions on the paper. You're given a total of 2 hours and 15 minutes to complete the paper. This is the longest of the English exams, therefore being considerate of timings is especially important so you complete every question. Candidates must use pens with black ink. Really importantly, there are 3 sections on this paper. You must answer 1 question from section A, 1 question from section B, and both questions from section C. There are an additional 4 marks on offer in section A for A04, which is measuring the accuracy of your spelling and grammar, and the quality of your vocabulary and clarity of writing. This paper is marked out of a total of 96, with 34 marks for section A, a further 30 for section B, and 32 marks for section C. Considering this, I'd recommend spending 45 minutes on section A, 45 minutes on section B, and 45 minutes on section C. There are slight differences between the marks available on each section, but for me, it's easier to keep track of time during the exam this way. Okay, let's look inside the paper. At this point, you'll need to be aware of the text that you personally have studied in your class for the exam. As you can see, there are a range of texts in each section. Section A covers modern texts, which includes plays or prose written after 1914. Here's an example of the contents page from 2023, although new texts have been added for 2024, which include Princess and the Hustler, Leave Taking, and My Name is Leon. It is vital you choose the text which you have studied, and only this one. Every year, within the pressure of the exam, students make simple mistakes, so go into the exam with a clear focus on the text you have been studying in class. Moving on to section B, this is the poetry anthology section, and again, you have to select the anthology you have studied in class with your teacher. Choose from either Love and Relationships, Power and Conflict, which are the 2 most commonly studied collections, and new for 2024 exam is Worlds and Lives, which some schools will have studied for the first time this year. Section C is Unseen Poetry, and for this section all students look at the same unseen poems, so no need to select. So, once you've glanced at the contents, I'd recommend highlighting the page numbers of the specific texts you've studied before heading over to section A to start work on your first essay. I'm going to use the example for an inspector calls, since this is one of the most popular options for modern texts. As you'll see, section A gives you a choice of 2 questions. You can spend a minute or 2 reading both options, but choose only one answer. Looking at these 2 options for an inspector calls, first you have, Mr. Burling says, a man has to mind his own business and look after himself and his own. How far does Priestley present Mr. Burling as a man who cares only for himself and his family? This question has a character focus and is asking you to evaluate or weigh up the evidence relating to how Mr. Burling is a selfish individual. The second option is, how far does Priestley present male characters as irresponsible in the play? As you can see, this is a broader question which focuses on the male characters and links to the theme of responsibility in the play. The options tend to take this form: 1 question which focuses on a character, 1 which focuses on a theme. It's totally up to you which you choose. I would simply recommend reading both through and quickly asking yourself questions like, which of these questions can I generate the most ideas about? Which one is most closely aligned with the revision I've done? Which question suits the quotations I've memorized? You should have a gut reaction based on your revision, and I'd encourage you to simply go with your gut and get started without wasting too much time deciding. As you can see, whichever option you choose, you should highlight the key language which tells you the topic of the question. Whichever option you choose, you are not given an extract here, so you must make a plan relying fully on your knowledge of the text. This is why it is essential to memorize key aspects of the plot, character details, and themes before the exam. You should aim to spend 5 to 10 minutes planning before beginning to write. You can mind map your ideas and references around the question, or create a quick paragraph outline in your essay booklet. Either way, planning is essential so you write a clear, focused, and coherent essay which links to the question. Try to establish a big idea or thesis which links to the question, and make sure each paragraph or idea links into this thesis so your essay is well structured and tightly controlled. If we look at the first question, which focuses on Mr. Burling as a man who only cares about himself and his family, a good thesis would be: Priestley consciously presents Burling as a man who only cares about himself and his family in order to create a construct of a stereotypical capitalist businessman. Throughout the play, Burling's actions and words reinforce the idea that the ideology of capitalism erodes community. Priestley does this to promote his own socialist agenda. Once you've created a simple plan, you should have about 35 minutes to write your essay. Remember to keep looking back over what you've written to check you are focusing your answer on the specific question that's being asked. This brings me onto the mark scheme. Section A uses 3 main criteria, which are called assessment objectives, or AOs for short. Each objective measures a specific skill you are required to show. AO1 is worth 12 marks out of 34. Here's the criteria in detail. Read, understand, and respond to texts. Students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response. Use textual references, including quotations, to support and illustrate interpretations. It measures your ability to answer the question that's been asked, express your own views on the text, and back up your ideas using evidence from the text. This could be direct quotations, paraphrase, or knowledge of the plot, etc. AO2 is also worth 12 marks out of 34. It tests your ability to analyse the language, form, and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects, using relevant subject terminology where appropriate. To achieve these marks, you must analyse the methods a writer uses. They list language, things like similes, alliteration, metaphors, etc. Structure, which is shifts in character or the order of events, etc. And form, which means the style of a text. For example, in An Inspector Calls, the form is a morality play or made well play. The next main mark criteria is AO3, which is worth 6 marks out of 34. AO3 requires students to show understanding of the relationships between texts and the contexts in which they were written. Context simply refers to the environment or circumstances which affect our reading of the text. This can be details like the influence of the time it was written in, the views and attitudes of the writer, which link to the text, or things like culture or other text which influenced it. For AO3, it is vital that the context links to the question. You will not be awarded marks if you simply show historical knowledge, which is not relevant to the question at hand. Finally, AO4 is worth 4 marks out of 34 on Section A, and measures a student's ability to use a range of vocabulary and sentence structures for clarity, purpose, and effect, with accurate spelling and punctuation. Simply make sure you write clearly and accurately, with correct spelling and grammar, and challenging vocabulary. Let's quickly look at a section of a student's answer for An Inspector Calls to see how marks would be awarded for each AO. This paragraph opens with the AO1 linked statement. Firstly, it is clear Burling is presented as a selfish individual from the very opening of the play. Then the answer moves on to an AO2 structural analysis of how Priestley establishes Burling's character in the beginning. Priestley deliberately establishes Burling's character as self-centered through his repeated domination of the conversation at the dining table. Instead of praising Gerald and Sheila's engagement in terms of their love for one another, Priestley focuses Burling's speech on the fact that their marriage will serve his business interests. Into the middle of the paragraph, the student uses a reference from Burling's speech for AO1, before linking in a relevant AO3 contextual point about capitalism and industrialists. His comment that Croft and Burling's are no longer competing, but are working together for lower costs and higher prices, links to the capitalist principle of profitability Burling's character sees that the engagement will allow him to reduce the workers' wages at his factory through working alongside Crofts Limited, Gerald's family's company. This displays Priestley's intention to define Arthur's character as a ruthless industrialist whose interest solely lies in making profit at the expense of his workers' wages. Finally, the response circles back to the question for AO1 while making another relevant context link for AO3. His lack of social awareness also furthers the view that he barely cares for his own family, since he continues to grandstand pompously that there isn't a chance of war, rather than tenderly celebrating his daughter's engagement. Therefore, from the very opening, Burling's character embodies a sense of self-obsession, which is used to overtly criticise the power of capitalist greed in Edwardian society. That covers how to approach Section A. Now we'll quickly cover Section B, the Poetry Anthology Comparative Essay. So after completing your first essay in the first 45 minutes, you will turn to the relevant page of Section B. For this example, I've chosen to feature power and conflict poetry, since it's a popular choice for many schools. As you can see, the format is different to Section A. You are given a list of all the poems in the anthology on one side, and a question along with one of the poems on the other side. Look above the poem and you'll see the question. Take a look at this one. Compare how poets present the ways people are affected by difficult experiences in Remains and one other poem from Power and Conflict. Whichever anthology you study, you are always given a named poem and asked to compare it to a second from the collection based on your memory. Next, you would highlight the specific language in the question. Here the question focuses the ways people are affected by difficult experiences. Then, I would recommend reading the named poem and highlighting evidence which links to the topic for about 3 minutes. Once you have a confident idea of how the named poem links to the topic of the question, scan down the poem list on the opposite page and consider which poems will compare well. Just like in Section A, don't take too long stressing over this. Make a gut decision based on another poem you know well that links to the same theme. For this particular question, I would favour poems with a clear focus on personal emotions, such as Poppies, Kamikaze, or War Photographer. But many of the poems would work here. Remember, you are simply asked to compare. The poems do not have to be overtly similar. Once you've decided on your second poem, spend a further 5 minutes making a plan where you draw comparisons between both poems based on the question. You will have about 35 minutes to write your essay. The mark scheme is again based on AO1, AO2, and AO3 for this question, with the only difference being the focus on AO1 is comparison. You must focus your answer on comparing poems, otherwise you cannot mark highly on the exam. Similar to Section A, consider starting your essay with a clear 2-part thesis, which will guide the essay as a whole. Consider how this example covers the AO1 comparison skill. Both Remains and War Photographer explore the power of difficult experiences to dominate the memory with feelings of guilt and bitterness. However, while Armitage's soldier's experience is based on the guilt which remains after actively killing someone, Duffy's War Photographer deals with the guilt of inaction, since they simply observed violent actions without direct involvement. You can see in this example how the response will draw on evidence linking to guilt, as it's a difficult experience in both poems. The answer can then focus on comparing references, methods, and specific context relating to the question. When you have completed your essay for Section B, you should have roughly 45 minutes remaining. You will turn to Section C, where there are 2 questions based on unseen poems. The first question is worth 24 marks. You should spend 30 to 35 minutes on this one. The second is worth 8 marks and will require 10 to 15 minutes. Question 27.1 gives you an unseen poem. In this case, it is I Am Offering This Poem by Jimmy Santiago Baca. You need to write a detailed analysis of the poem based on the question, which is placed below the poem. Before you read the poem, look carefully at the question and highlight the language which forms the focus or topic. Let's look at this example. In I Am Offering This Poem, how does the poet present the speaker's feelings about love? Once you've identified the topic, in this case, the speaker's feelings about love, you can read the poem and select evidence for your essay. You'll want to highlight 3 or more quotations to focus your answer on, and annotate linking to techniques and their effects. The mark scheme for 27.1 assesses only AO1 and AO2, so your response will not need to consider contextual links, such as the writer's opinions or social historical context. As you will not have pre-studied the poem, this would not be possible anyway. Again, make sure all of your analysis links into the question that's been asked, so you achieve high marks for both AO1 and AO2. Look at this opening as an example. In I Am Offering This Poem, the poet explores how love itself is a gift more powerful than any physical object. It also offers thoughts on the power and beauty of poetry to express love. Firstly, the poet creates a sense of love's never-ending power through the use of refrain. Each stanza is bookended by the refrain, I love you, to express how the speaker believes in the power of love to endure throughout life. You can see how the introduction establishes the focus of the answer for AO1, and in the next few lines the student begins to link in analysis of methods for AO2. Following 30 minutes or so of writing your response to 27.1 in section C, you will move on to 27.2, which is the final question in the paper. Students often find this question a challenge because of the length of the paper and the requirement to analyse methods in 2 poems after 2 hours of writing. Take a look at the format of this question. You are given a second poem, in this case, The Sun Has Burst the Sky, by Jenny Joseph. Before reading it, again, read the question carefully and make sure you highlight the target language of the question. Here we have, in both The Sun Has Burst the Sky and I Am Offering This Poem, the speakers describe their feelings about love. What are the similarities and or differences between the methods the poet uses to present these feelings? The statement identifies the focus of the question as feelings about love, and the question asks you to explore the similarities and or differences between the methods which present these feelings. Really importantly, the only marks available on this question are for AO2. This question is worth only 8 marks, so you will not be writing as much as the previous 3 questions. If we take a look at the mark scheme for this question, you'll see for higher marks it's about the quality of your comparison of methods in both poems. For level 3, or 5 to 6 marks, your comparison needs to be clear. For the top band, of 7 to 8 marks, the words analytical and insightful are used, which essentially mean digging as deeply as you can for meanings and effects. Because you have little time on this response, I recommend using 3 pairs of short quotations from both poems and go straight into comparing techniques. Take a quick look at this example. Both poems create a sense of love being never-ending. Baccha's repeated refrain of I love you remains unchanged throughout the poem, and therefore echoes the power of love to endure. We can also see this as expressing the sense of love outpouring relentlessly from the speaker's heart because of its lasting power. However, Joseph alters her refrain from because I love you in the first 3 instances to I love you to show the increasing earnestness in the speaker's account. In the final I love you, the mood shifts to confident and definite, which emphasizes how the poet feels love can also deepen and change with time. Note how the student creates a depth of comparison of techniques by developing 2 interpretations for each quote, allowing them to achieve the higher level analysis marks. Also, simply using the poet's surnames to save time rather than naming the long titles allows you to write quickly and get to the analysis quickly. This question is undeniably tricky, but it is possible to achieve high marks in a short response provided you know how you're being marked. So, that covers all the basic information for how to approach AQA English Literature Paper 2. Good luck if you're sitting the exam this year, and let me know if you found the information helpful.